Kind of Blue sounds like it was recorded in a different studio. It sounds like they brought in all the baffles, and they're like it's recorded contemporary. It's a very different sound.
I think Kind of Blue also sounds like they're playing together in the same room at times, which jazz was starting to go away from that to some degree. And by the 80s, that becomes much more prevalent where you would track your rhythm like rock and roll. And of course, jazz is about dialogue and conversation. So it's really hard for me to understand how you can multi-track jazz and not have a whole band playing together. But Kind of Blue does sound intimate and condensed and warm in spite of its coolness.
Why do you think that record is so fetishized endlessly, 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 endlessly?
It is super cool, you know, and it is easy listening on some level. It's never too abrasive. Just the cover, I think, and I think jazz, for the most part, sadly, has been reduced to a handful of records for the average human being. You know, they don't really dive into even Miles Davis canon. They know Kind of Blue. And they might have got Sketches of Spain to play on a hot summer day. You know, so I think it's kind of, in part, just the marketing behind it all that's kept Kind of Blue on the edge of everyone's tongues. It shows up enough films and soundtracks that it's just stayed very omnipresent.
Endless reissues.
Endless reissues.
Endless audiophile reissues. You find the record everywhere. And yeah.
It's the only jazz record I play on DJing where almost every time one or two people will be like, oh, Kind of Blue's awesome.
Right.
Almost every track from the record.
I guess it's the entryway. It'd be fine if it was just the entryway, but the fetishism, and I have to buy 15 copies of the same record, it addresses so many weird human traits and tendencies.
I can't get that. Why anybody would have 15 copies of the same record?
I don't have one copy. I mean, I have multiple. I'll keep a mono and a stereo copy, and if I see a better condition, I'll buy it.
If I have 2 copies of a record, it's because I had the OJC for years, and then I found the original pressing for a decent price.
Right.
That's it. There's no reason why I'd have 2 copies.
I mean, I guess it's wonderful for newbies. They want to get into it, but then it's that weird collecting thing, which also involves I'm going to push the button and be ahead on my tone poets, which is really, really great. And your last question is the funniest question in here, but we'll get to that.
One last thing. The only other record that really has that same appeal across audiences is Dave Brubeck's Take 5. I could play that song at any event, and half the room will be like, oh, cool.
What happens if you play like Coltrane Ballads or the Johnny Hartman record?
There's no recognition. People will enjoy it. You know,
it's funny because Time Out's so long ago, but you would think they'd be too old to understand it or to even be knowledgeable of the title.
It's so omnipresent in films. I'm amazed how often I hear Take 5 in movies. And movies are a great way of informing us of what we need to play in certain moments of our lives.
To some degree, you know, Kind of Blue is the Sade of jazz. It's sort of the way I feel. You know, she's wonderful. You know,
I love
smooth, easily listening, really cool, really hip. Yeah. But there's, you know, more to life than Kind of Blue gets posted a few times a week. How often are Working, Cooking, Steaming, Relaxing posted?
Not enough compared to that.
Bitches Brew and all those records get posted more.
Miles' work before Cooking, Working, Steaming, Relaxing is almost non-existent in today's jazz collector's mind point of view. You know, they might know the one called Miles with the green or the blue cover with the trees and the little canal thing, but you get before that first quintet, people don't know Miles Davis Dig. They don't know Miles Davis and horns. They don't know any of that early Miles stuff. And of course, he was very much seeking his identity, and his career was actually in a real low point leading up to Newport in '55 when he signs with Columbia, and his fortunes change greatly. And he pumps out those last records for Prestige and Bob's Your Uncle, as they say.
It's really funny because I did a little Miles video, and I forgot I had those records, so I put them up chronologically. And it's even interesting how the recordings change. In the early recordings, everybody's tentative. They're all tentative, but Miles is up front like a vocalist, and they're all in the back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even the records that constitute the first great quintet without being called that. But then as the popularity grows on the working, cooking, steaming, everybody moves up front and become much more self-assured.
If memory serves, they had played together for a year as that group
That makes
before
sense.
they cooked Work and Steam and Relaxing,
Right.
before they
Yeah.
did those in 2 days. So they
Right.
went in the studio having played those songs every day for a year. And that's why they were able to knock them out like in 2 days, because they had such refined their interaction with each other by that point.
Such mastery. I mean, just I listen to those records all the time. I also listen to them for audiophile purposes. But I have
Yeah.
those records, the second Miles Quintet. Those are like in my DNA. All that stuff is in my brain.
I love the interval between those two great bands. Some of my favorite Miles stuff. Someday My Prince Will Come. I
Right.
love it. I
Right.
love Seven Steps to Heaven.
I love parts of
Four and
those
More.
records.
Was
Yeah.
that?
Well, Four and
I
More
love
is freaking incredible. And
Yep.
that's the album. I mean, from a drumming standpoint, that's the record that sent many drummers to the woodshed. You know,
Is
because
that Tony first with him?
that's Tony. Well, the
When he was
first
like
first is
15?
title track on Seven Steps to Heaven is his
Okay.
first appearance with Miles.
Okay.
I didn't realize till recently. I mean, you probably know this. My Funny Valentine is like My Funny Valentine and Four and More the same concert. They just divvied up
Right.
up-tempo burning tracks.
That happens a lot, actually.
Yeah,
I forgot that Tony Williams was on the title track of Seven Steps to Heaven.
yeah. He's
Because
on
Frank
the title
Butler's
track.
on most of that record.
Yeah, right. But that one track, you know, when you
Okay.
contrast it with Frank Butler, it's so innovative what he
Sure.
plays on Seven Steps
Sure.
to Heaven, right down to the solo. It's just remarkable, the stuff.
I love Victor Feldman on that stuff too.
Yeah. It's funny, when I did my video, I had to do the chronological of each one. And it's so funny, after he signs with Columbia, Prestige is still hanging on. So they put out Miles Plays for Lovers, Miles and Coltrane play Rodgers and Hart's Songbook. Some of those records are so out of nowhere, they're not even listed on Wikipedia. You know, but they sound pretty good. The Prestige one that you referred to earlier, that just says Miles on the front, and it shows that photo of the murky river or whatever. There's the green cover and the blue cover, but it's the same record, isn't it?
Yes, same record.
Yeah,
and that's technically the first quintet, first debut record. Yeah,
just marketing. So let's go on to number 6. This is an interesting question. Each man made 20 LPs for Argo. Are you more of a Ramsey Lewis or an Ahmed Jamal fan?
Ramsey Lewis is a great R&B stylist. He's got the Black Gospel Church throughout his bones. That great group he played with L.D. Young and Holt. Those guys were fantastic bass and drums. Going back to the Daddy-O Presents early in the Argo discography, Ramsey Lewis is fun. And of course, he has a lot of popularity in the mid-'60s with some of his more crossover stuff.
Christmas records popular.
Right. And what was the big hit he had in 65? I can hear it in my head right now.
I don't know.
Oh, it's a huge hit. You know, the second I said it. But he had a number of big hits in 64, 65 that were kind of rhythm and blues, crossover jazz. And he fits that niche. He's easy to play for people. But Ahmad Jamal is minimal and full of space and longing. And I don't know if you remember this, but Miles Davis credits Ahmad Jamal for largely reshaping how he played.
That's right.
It was that spacious approach,
right?
Minimalism. And of course, Ahmad Jamal gets some of that from Count Basie, believe it or not. Basie was a very sparse player. He would just drop little things in. The rhythm section would play in the tracks. He would just put little things, and the horn players have to flesh out all the meat and bones around it, you know. And Ahmad Jamal is very minimal and haunting with melodic pauses.
Very original.
Space that kind of just empties out itself, and they'll come back in and tinkle some. They both made a massive quantity of music for that label for Argo. They were kind of the backbone of Argo success-wise. They both sold pretty well. You can find those records in pawn shops and thrift stores. And let me tell you, any early Argo, Ramsey Lewis or Ahmad Jamal is worth grabbing for under $5-10. They're great records. But I'll probably go with Jamal.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, Ahmad Jamal is a much more important figure. Like you said, he's a big influence on Miles Davis. That track, Poinciana, with Vernio Fournier, who was an amazing thrush player, that's a really important track. And the stuff he's playing, it's a really unique groove. That's something that a lot of drummers have studied and aped. I kind of think of Ramsey Lewis as the Black George Shearing. I don't know. That guy does nothing for me. Just those records just don't seem to have any weight or anything. But you answer the question. That was where Young Holt Limited came from, was Ramsey Lewis. Right. And those records are funkier than the Ramsey Lewis. I mean, I'm going to get a hate mail, I guess, for people who love Ramsey Lewis, but they're totally different. Ahmad Jamal and and Ramsey Lewis. But a good,
Young old
good
stuff
question.
goes more towards R&B.
Yeah, we can't keep those Jamal records in stock at the store, at the Pershing and all that. Those are important records.
Absolutely.
And I'm writing it. Well, I already wrote it. I should send it to you. You might get a kick out of it. A history of jazz drumming piece for Stereophile. So I was able to put together a listing thing of titles. And when I saw that question, I realized I forgot to include Verneuil Fournier with Ahmed Jamal, because
Sure.
he's really important in the lineage of all this stuff. But those Jamal records, if you can find them, they're not that easy to find here. I don't see them that often. They're well played when you find them.
Yeah, they really are.
Right.
Ramsey Lewis too.
Bossa or not to bossa. This is a pet peeve with me, and I'll go first. You know, there's bossa nova, a Brazilian popular contemporary music of the 60s and 70s, late 50s, is just incredible music, and harder to find than anything, harder to find than any jazz records. They just don't exist. And I'll show off the few that I think should be reissued that are just amazing records. Quarteto M. Psi, an amazing vocal group. A Louis Bonfer record. I forgot where I found this. I mean, just Elis Regina, you know, one of the most popular artists in Brazil, I think overdosed or something. She died really young. This record you can kind of find, João Gilberto, the guy who wrote The Girl from Ipanema, Vinicius Menores, and why this record has not been reissued, I got no idea for the cover alone.
Right.
Costa. I mean, it is such a huge world of music. It's a universe. And I would think Elenco, the big Brazilian label, must be owned by Universal, I guess.
I don't know.
I mean,
were those all Brazilian LPs?
Yeah, I pulled like those, like some of my favorites, and they are so impossible to find. I told the story once that I was in a bidding war with this guy here in New York on a bunch of Brazilian records, and he won. And I emailed him to say, hey, that's, you know, yada, yada, yada. Turns out he owned a Brazilian restaurant in the East Village, and he had CD copies of all the records, and he made me CD copies with the artwork for free. A Brazilian guy.
Awesome.
It was
That's
just
awesome.
so nice. But I mean, you can still find the Sergio Mendes records. Those are sort of easy to find.
Yeah.
We used to have a store here in New York called Tropicalian Furs that closed, that just sold Brazilian music. And there's got a friend of mine named Greg Kaz has all those records. He's on Instagram. He's a DJ, just an incredibly knowledgeable guy. Why is this question bossa or not to bossa?
It's just, are you a bossa fan or are you not a bossa fan?
Isn't everybody?
I'm surprised they meet a lot of people, or not meet, but hear a lot of people comment how they don't like it.
What happens
know,
when you play that music on gigs?
People love it.
Right.
People, they can feel the sand between their toes and the coconut oil dripping down their chin. It's wonderful. You know? And when you live in Minnesota and you get 2 months of nice weather, you'll take every added incentive to think about the sun that you can get here. So bossa nova always goes over well.
You should take your wife to Rio sometime. You
I'd
would love it.
Sugarloaf Mountain me, baby. I'll take it. The beaches, the weather, fantastic. My favorite bossa record, believe it or not, is the Antonio Carlos Jobim record. It's just called that, I think, on Verve. I love all the simple, basic finger piano he's doing on Corcovado and One Note Samba, Meditation, Agua de Beber. They're all kind of these very basic, staple versions of all these songs. They're a great way to kind of introduce yourself to the language of the bossa nova. And so much of that record is kind of crept into modern pop culture that it's going to be much more familiar than you think it will be. You'll know and recognize a lot of those tunes. And I know I hear them in film all the time. I do love Louis Bonfa. There's a guy by the name of Bolo Sete who's pretty fun. But Verve really kind of takes the lead in terms of doing the bossa nova. Creed Taylor recognized it was going to be a cash cow.
And they had the Stan Getz record that made the explosion in the U.S. So
and Oscar Gilberto and all those records. The Bob Brookmeyer one's outstanding. Verve really does a great job capturing that sound and then proliferating it without watering it down too much. It stays fairly substantial. Again, it's bossa nova, so it's not going to be Coltrane Quartet, but you got to love the bossa.
It's funny, even on the new Billie Eilish album, there's a song called Billy Bossa. It's a bossa nova. and
That's awesome.
she's singing in her very sensuous kind of come hither way. I mean, I guess she's great.
You know my, you know my, what's what I'm looking for? My introduction to bossa nova was as a kid. My dad was a pipe organ builder in churches. A lot of them were black churches on the East Coast, in DC, Detroit, Hamilton, Ontario. He was building these black churches, Baptist churches with pipe organs. And so my dad loved organs, including Hammond organs and electric organs and all that. And a lot of them have that little switch that said bossa nova, and the beat would kick in. And I had no idea what it was or what the music was, but I saw the bossa nova switch on the organ, and I would kind of try to comp and play along to it, having no idea really what it was.
Oh,
That's what bossa nova was for the first 10 years of my life.
So you had organs in your house growing up?
Yeah. And
your
my
dad was
dad,
an organ player? Did he play as well?
By ear. He learned the gospel hymns kind of by ear, and he also learned to have his relationship with his Savior through that experience in the church. Yeah, and pipe organ has a way of crawling down your spine and really making you feel and hear God in a way.
Well,
it's pretty magnificent.
These must have been big churches.
Yeah, you don't build a pipe organ in a small church.
Yeah,
you need a big congregation, and pipe organs came in a lot of sizes. You know, you can have a one rack with a few sets of horns or pipes, or you can have massive cathedral walls of pipes and 4 tiers of. You know, it's pretty varied how big they can get, but they're not cheap, and they're really falling out of disuse now. My dad, in the last years of his life, really lamented the falling away of the pipe organ from modern culture.
The next question is fascinating. I've had to deal with this so many times in the Jazz Violin Lovers group as to what I think constitutes a jazz singer or not. What to you makes a singer a jazz singer?
There's 2 answers to this for me. Number 1 is you can be a jazz singer if you use your voice like a horn, and you're bending notes and alternating the melody, finding alternate ways. You might stay at the original melody, the first verse, and then the second and third, fourth line, you might be finding alternate melodic phrasing and singing like a horn. But I find the more someone sings like the horn, generally, the less people like them. A guy like Bob Dorough is very much a horn bebop player. And a lot of people are like, I don't really like Bob Dorough, you know. The other type of jazz singer to me is you're a singer being backed by a jazz group. And one of the tricks I've found collecting all these labels is that a lot of the great pop singers of the 40s and 50s made a lot of records, and the label is going to tell you a lot about what that record is going to sound like. If you're a Teddy King, for example, on Storyville, you're going to be backed by a great little jazz band, and that's going to make you sound like a jazz singer because you're just a little jazz quartet behind you. But if that same Teddy King on RCA with one of those big studio orchestras behind her, suddenly she's making kind of schlocky pop music. It doesn't even sound like the same singer. So A, it's your vocal stylings and your ability to kind of improvise, but B, it's also what kind of music is backing you. And there's a lot of examples of singers that when they're with a great little jazz quartet, they make great jazz music. When they're with a more bigger main produced Hollywood group, they sound like pop music.
Yeah, those are good concrete definitions. For me, blues feeling in their singing, like I don't consider Lena Horne or Bobby Darin to be jazz singers. They just don't. They're kind of strict and they're square. And for me, you also get into the currency of the swing rhythm, which was still present in American culture up through the 70s. You can hear it on the Odd Couple soundtracks, all the, like the Tonight Show Band, all that stuff. Swing feeling was everywhere. It's nowhere now. But even so, you had a lot of pop musicians. I had a record. It's a great record. The first record by a vocalist named Carol Ventura on Prestige. She swings her ass off. It's great. She's some like, you know, Italian chick from Queens or something, but it is just monstrous. But then, you know, is Edie Gourmet a jazz singer? No, she's not, but she's a great singer and she has a lot of soul, but it's really, you know, it almost gets into why is Sade not a jazz singer? She's an R&B singer. Never mind, there's no jazz rhythms or a jazz backing group. But we have a jazz vocals section at the store, and it's thinly populated. But you know, it's Nina Simone, Helen Humes, Mabel Mercer, Billie Holiday, Bessie Smith. I mean, you know, that's blues feeling and all of that stuff. But
My
you know,
rule of thumb is, my rule of thumb is on, especially the female jazz singers, who I like a lot of them. The label will tell you everything. If it's some gal singing on Bethlehem, they're gonna have a great little band behind them with maybe Oscar Pettiford on the bass,
it's a good
O.C.
point.
Johnson on the drums, some fantastic piano players gonna be comping behind her. That's gonna let you know that this is probably gonna be great.
That's a good point.
You know, small label vocal stuff is so much more likely to be charming, and small labels don't really have the budget to put together these huge orchestral ensembles with string movements, and they don't have a big orchestra waiting in the pit to record like a Capitol Studios does, you know. So for the most part, if you see something on small labels, Savoy, Prestige, Bethlehem, Storyville has some great vocal jazz stuff. That stuff's going to be kick ass.
But it's
gonna be
always
great.
hard to know. Like the Carol Ventura couldn't be more obscure. The first record is great. The second one is a dog. It sounds like it sounds like they said, no, that was really cool, but we got to sell some records here.
Well,
And you know, the first record, it might be Benny Golson or something doing the arrangements. The second one is just a tepid, dull pop record. It
Sure.
really shocked me. But there's you find so many of these records by, like, who's Terry Thornton? I mean, I'm saying as a question. She, you know,
Yeah.
she was very popular, obviously, but never hit it big. Or
Yeah.
and,
For our
and now we have like Veronica Swift, who, you know, a young female jazz singer. Her father was Hot O'Brien, an important jazz pianist in the city. She's as much a pop singer as she is a jazz singer. And apparently she did this is really interesting. Apparently she did an interview in Jazz Times where she slagged off, she said singing standards made her feel like she was in a box. So Benny Green, the jazz pianist, wrote this long, scathing diatribe on Instagram. But young singers aren't beholden to be in any box. You know, like there's another singer, Jazamaya Horn, I think your name is, who's a jazz singer, but I don't think she's really a jazz singer. Or, you know, just modern day singers are trying to make a living, and they could be jazz trained, but they can also sing pop. It's like back in the day, jazz drummers couldn't play funk and jazz. Now all these young black guys can play it all night and day. It's easy.
Do you like vocalays? Guys like King Pleasure, who are kind of singing through their mouth, the horn parts, and doing like horn solos, not singing really words. They were just singing tone with their mouth as a horn player.
I didn't like King Pleasure. I can't stand John Hendricks. I can't stand the
You like John Hendricks?
singers. I can't
You like
stand him. I want to run away.
No.
Tries to me, it sounds really formulaic and kind of white. I don't know. I love him on the George Russell record. I love that.
I think when they're doing those the bassy stuff, Lumber Hendricks and Ross, that stuff I think it's pretty hard swinging stuff.